Hey, what's up, vinyl people? It's Don Wilkins back with Bow Records. Have you ever wondered what pressing of an album you have? Sometimes you got two records that look identical, but not necessarily the same. So we're going to be talking about how to figure out: do you have an original? Do you have a reissue, a repress? So stay with me. You're watching Bow Records. Hey, welcome back. I'm Don Wilkins with Bow Records, a vinyl, mobile, and social media shop based out of Owensboro, Kentucky. And as I said in the intro, have you ever came across a record or purchased a record that you just sort of wondered what pressing it might be? Is it is it an original? Is it a reissue? Is it a repressing? There are differences among all three. So I'm going to talk about some ways you can, figure out what pressing you have. And, sometimes it can also, if you're into, the value of records, that will certainly dictate the value of a record, along with condition, of course, of the vinyl and the sleeve. But definitely, pressing sometimes can really dictate the price if you're worried about that. But I'm going to show you some things, some nuances, some finer details that can help lead you toward figuring out which pressing of this or version of this particular album that you may have. And first of all, if you haven't downloaded or signed up for an account online with Discogs, I would highly recommend that if you're going to start accumulating more records, collecting records, because what I'm going to show you can be found there, because Discogs is a database for records, and I don't know that I've not been able to find a particular record I've been looking for to figure out what version I had. Sometimes it may take me a few minutes. It used to take me longer in the beginning, not so much now, since I kind of know what to look for. And sometimes now I can just look at the label or just something about the record and automatically know if it's an original or a reissue. But there are some things you can look at on the record to kind of help get you into the right direction. So when you go to Discogs, you can search the matrix numbers or the SKU on the record that came along a little later, the barcodes. So let's kind of get into that and kind of where to look for on the records for some of the numbers. First of all, before we kind of get into labels and that sort of thing, but where you can find those numbers you need to, you can search for in Discogs. I'm going to start off with one of the more notorious kind of bands as far as versions go. I'm talking about the Beatles, and this is their album Revolver. Great album, but my gosh, there are a ton of versions of this album out there. And if you'll see, I'll show you up here at the top. There's those numbers right there. You can kind of try to start there, and go and search those numbers, but you're probably going to get several versions, because this is actually an original 1966 version, and I'll get into how I know that in just a second, because I'm going to show you the reissue. It looks almost exactly the same, right? As far as the cover, it even has the pretty much the same numbers up there, if you can see that. It has the stereo right there, same as this one. To the naked eye, there's very little difference or no difference in these two albums side by side. So now, so you can look up those numbers, and then sometimes that might get you to the record or the version with the listings on Discogs. But so then you have to pull out the actual vinyl sometimes, and in the vinyl you're not probably it'd be really hard to see, but down in that what we call the dead wax between the grooves and the label, the dead wax right in here, there are what they call matrix numbers, and you might be able to see it right there, right up in here. Yeah. So, and then you have to usually, have them under some bright light to be able to see those matrix numbers, and those can get you pretty close as well sometimes. And sometimes there's some markings on there. Sometimes you'll have the initials of the fellow or whoever mixed the record or engineered the record. Sometimes that's there. But whenever it becomes, whenever that still doesn't do the trick, well, Discogs also a lot of times post the photos of the albums, the covers, the vinyl, the labels. And so if you notice on here, this label is an orange capital label. Okay, so here's the thing about the Beatles is, they were on Capitol, Apple Records, and so some of the records came out, the original versions came out on Apple, some of them came out on Capitol. Here, at least in the United States, or over in UK, that's a whole different kind of discussion. But here, mostly in the United States, for the most part, Capitol and Apple Records. Now, the early records, I think VJ Records or something like that. That record up there introducing the Beatles was on a different label, but most of their records as they went along were either on Capitol or the Apple label. So, but Revolver was on Capitol, but this is an orange label, so that knowing when this came out in 1966, this is a reissue. And so this is actually a 1976 reissue, to be exact. And so let me show you what the original label looks like. The rainbow label, and which is also on Capitol. Let me turn it around here so you can kind of see that a little better. Yeah. So you had the early Capitol labels had what they call the rainbow label, and so that's how the early Capitol labels. It's kind of like with Columbia. Columbia Records, whenever their early records had what they call the 6i label, then they went to the 2i label, and then they went to a really different variation of the label, into the 70s and on up. So that's how you can, with labels, when you start realizing the earlier version of these labels can kind of also clue you in, how early a pressing you might have. But the Beatles are really notorious about just, I want to exaggerate and say a million versions, but they're not quite a million, but there are a lot of them out there whenever you start trying to, narrow down what you have. And so you have those labels to kind of help you through that process. Another way you can kind of help, and maybe a little faster way, if an album has the barcodes on them. So, but the barcodes, and this is another way you know how, when a pressing came out. It can still be a reissue, but anything usually before 1980 didn't have a barcode on it. You might find some maybe 79ish, but mainly 80 and up. Whenever they started adding the barcodes, to the cover. So let me show you an example of that. The Kansas album here that I have, The Point of No Return, with the Dust in the Wind. Okay, yeah, so this album originally came out in 1977. So in 77, no barcodes were on these. Would have been on the original version of this. So on this one, you see that barcode there. So that lets me know immediately when I see this. Oh, okay, this is a reissue. Now it's an early reissue. I think it's around a 1980 reissue. And it's a really nice copy of this record too. But here is the original version. You see, there's no barcode in that corner there, like there is this one. You can see that. So, reissue, original, and then that's what the label looks like inside. And so there's that way you can try to figure it out. On your smartphone, whenever you have Discogs on your phone, doesn't of course have this online, or if you're using your PC or your Mac or whatever you have, your desktop computer, but on your iPhone, the app will actually have a way for you to scan those barcodes, and it will immediately take you to those versions of those records. So that's a quick way to kind of get you to where you want to go, and then you can kind of start figuring out from there. Let me show you another example with the Beatles, and then I'm going to take you and give you some show you another album that is really crazy, because it's an album that came out the same year, but the labels on them are similar, but there are some details. If you're not paying attention, you might think you have one version of a record and you really don't. But let's talk about this Beatles records real quick. I have here Abbey Road, came out in '69 on the Apple label. So this is the original version on the Apple label. So you have that famous cover here from the Beatles. This is like I said, the 1968. So the other version I have here is from 1978. Okay, and it's on Capitol. It's like the purple Capitol label. And so usually in Discogs, they might say purple label on it, and then they list the year and whatnot on it. So that kind of helps you, really narrow it down as well. So when you kind of figure out, whenever you come across a record, wherever your record shop, they do, if they sell pre-owned records, you can pull out the label and say, oh, okay, this is a reissue, just based on the label. So, but then you still might have to dig a little deeper to figure out, the exact year of that particular version. Now, whenever it comes, to some albums, especially this album, a very popular album, Rumors, Fleetwood Mac. So I've got actually with me right now two different versions of this album, both original 1977 versions, but the labels on them, at a glance will look the same. Let me show you the covers on both of these. So, the covers on these, they came out kind of different, kind of textured covers, and and you can also, there's a variation of the color of the covers as well. So that alone is not going to get you what you want to know. And so let me show you something whenever it comes to figuring out these labels, which is sometimes can drive you crazy trying to figure out which version you have, especially with this Rumors album. Like I said, both of these are 1977 original versions of this album. So you have this album right here, this version here, and you have to get into the nuances of this. You see that you have the Warner Brothers label, and then the Fleetwood Mac and the font. You know, it has a bolder font, and you can actually, you know, see that as far as the spacing between the Warner Brothers label and the font, where it starts here with the. So let me show you this other version where the font isn't as bold, and it's a little closer to the Warner Brothers logo. So, you know, you come across this, you know, at a yard sale or a record store, and you pull it, and it says, you know, OG 1977. Well, you know, those two albums right there actually have two different prices if you're going by the book. Okay, the one with the bolder font is actually worth a little bit more, and that comes down to you know, the pressings of where they were pressed, and the mix and all kinds of different things that collectors you know, think, okay, this is the better pressing of this album based on the plant it was pressed in. Okay, now, you know, if you're selling that record, and you know you can accurately say this is a you know, this is an OG pressing, and you know, of Rumors, and be accurate with that, and give a price on it. Now, you know, you can argue, you know, should you charge the $5 or $10 less for the other pressing that's not as desirable because it was pressed at a different plant, has a little different label? You know, that there's an argument to be made there. But with everything, I always say, you know, supply, demand, and condition will still always be the determining factor on your prices. So that Rumors album, you know, I used to be able to get those, you know, dime a dozen, you know, because they made so many of them. And rightly so, it's a great album. But now that album is so popular, you know, it'd go, you know, I've seen it as high as $30, $35, and you know, in good shape, but not mint or sealed or anything like that. So depending on what you're willing to pay for that, it can go up there. And I tend to sell mine that I get around 20, around that ballpark, 25 at the most, but it's going to have to be really, really clean all the way around the cover and the vinyl, but usually around $20 for that album. So I saved kind of the best for last, just because it's so interesting with this album. And this is just something, you know, you wouldn't necessarily know until you got into collecting and you hear about all these different nuances. So Michael Jackson's Thriller, 1982. My wife will tell you that I have the same album here, and I'm going to say, no, I don't. So even though they are both 82 versions, one of them is an original first press, and one of them is a repress from the same year. Now, you know, how do you know which really one you have? So the best way to know is by the back covers of these of the sleeves. So here we go. So on this album, it says produced by Quincy Jones, co-produced by Michael Jackson, right in here. See if you can see that without the glare. Okay, so when you see Michael Jackson as a co-producer, that means it's the repress of that album. So coming back to the other version that I have, you'll see that it's only Quincy Jones' is name on there. And on Discogs, it will say misprint for this version. But if you're a purist collector and you want to get the the first press original, you don't care that it's a quote misprint or whatever. You want the first press. So if you're out and you come across this record, immediately turn the cover over, see if Michael Jackson is or isn't there as the co-producer. Then you'll know which one it is. Either way, you're still going to have an original version from 1982 of this album. It just might not be the first pressing of that. It's going to be a repress. So, but either way, you can hold on to that repress until you come across the original, or you can be like me, just keep both. So, but like I said, it's just whenever you're in this for a while, you learn all the ways you can narrow down what pressing you have and whether or not it's an original or reissue. And I'm one of those. I prefer to have the original or as close to the original version as I can have. Now some original pressings are rare, and so they're really expensive or hard to come by. And then some, you're better off to get the original because they're actually cheaper than the reissues. So it just sort of depends on what artist it is and what era it is and how many pressings are out there, and of course supply and demand. So yeah, so I hope I've helped you along your vinyl journey, and hope you download your Discogs app to help you in that journey. And it's collecting records is a fun hobby, and it's always the thrill of the hunt, and you never know what you're going to come across. And when you do come across something, you want to be able to figure out what you have, right? So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Click the little bell that will let you know whenever I have a new video coming out. And also remember, I'm also a seller on Whatnot now, and I'm usually on there Saturday night, Sunday night, 8:30 or 9:30 every weekend, and so I'm selling some records there quite a bit. So join me there or join me here, whichever you prefer, or both. So I guess that'll do it. For Bow Records, I'm Don Wilkins. I'm out.